And what I found out was that Auckland Council, since the 1st of November 2010 when I got set up, is now exposed to derivatives to the tune of $5.8 billion. What Auckland Council now owes in debt is $5.5 billion. But they didn't give the exact detail of the names of the financial institutions, the banks, etc. Because what really concerns me is that our Prime Minister John Key is a shareholder in the Bank of America. Now, don't believe me, you check for yourself. You go to the parliamentary website, www.parliament.govt.nz, MPs, click, and there's a list of things that come up. Register of financial interest, click. Go to page 30, John Key, Bank of America. And that's what really concerns me, because how more susceptible are we now to derivatives trading anyway, given that was he was the master, he had the derivatives, real lunch, etc. And he's a shareholder in the Bank of America, so follow the dollar. I mean, whose interests are actually being served?
So we don't know, is there no record of who they're
I've
borrowing the
asked,
money from?
well, what I've done, because they didn't give me a complete, a proper official information request, because I asked exactly, and exactly means exactly, it means that, well, the names. And so I've done a further official information request, asking that, and I've also asked Treasury, I rang Treasury, and I spoke to the legal section, and I said I want to know legislative changes that have happened since 2008 that show how now, at local and central government, New Zealand's now able to get more into derivatives trading. I think that's probably about my turn. I mean, I could go on forever. I mean, there's heaps of stuff here, but hopefully you'll see that there's issues here that are a big deal. Mainstream media, they're notified, but they, for whatever reason, are choosing not to do stories, and I think especially one of the Office of the Auditor General being shareholder in Sky City. I mean, that's political dynamite. Nothing.
I joined the police when police still wore the old black uniform, and that used to fit me. We've all got younger and skinnier days. Anyway, the reason I want to go back to the police is because what's happening in the police is fundamental in the corruption, what's happening in New Zealand. In 1975, we went into blue uniform and we started getting computers. And your husband would probably remember the message switching, and you could talk. Yes, she said back still. We were able to send messages to each other. But in these days, like, we were the first girls to go on 24-hour shift. Until I joined the police, women had sat in a little back room, called out only when some old lady had to be helped across the road, or some offender had to be fingerprinted. So we went on 24-hour shifts, and believe it or not, I started in Whangarei, and there were guys who were taken off night patrol because their wives didn't want to have them spend the night in the car with vixens like us.
Oh, wow.
Yes, actually we had a lot more to fear of them than they had from us. But I loved my time at the police. I did all my exams. I was going to be a next commissioned officer, but I got married and I had kids, and I had my first child, stayed in the police, and when I went back, my boss didn't like the idea that there's such a thing as a pregnant policewoman who actually had more qualifications, and he did. So I got stuck onto frontline duties. I was denied my promotion to senior sergeant, and I walked out, and I've got 3 wonderful children who are all in their 20s now, and I went into private investigations. But what I've seen with the police, and of course I left before the police was amalgamated with traffic, and policing really relies on the goodwill of the public. And I believe that an enforcement function like traffic really puts the police at odds with people. When we joined the police, we set an IQ test. If you passed the IQ test, you became police. If you failed that, you became MOT, or Auckland City Council, Wellington City Council, and if you failed that, you were meta-made. We've now got meta-maids in the police who are commissioned officers. We also increased the physical fitness requirement, and that happened around about 1981 when we had the Springbok tour, when we were chasing people like Penny around town. And the cops were cops, and so one said, oh yes, I jumped a 6-foot fence, another one said I did this, and so we had this really high standard of physical fitness, which really precluded a lot of intelligent people from joining. They can't see the point in running a minute mile, because when you've got adrenaline rushing through your body, it's amazing what you can do. So then they came up with this concept of let's make the police a business. So instead of just funding the police have to fund their patrol cars, and they go to ACC and land transport, and that's why accident compensation is, the police are right there when there's a talk of assault or bodily injury, and why they're hot on any traffic matter. So fraud is completely out the window. In my day, we used to go to people's houses. Oh yes, the wheels have gone off your car, we'll fill in a report. Now we tell you to come to the police station. Oh, the police station's only open between 9 and 4. Oh, you don't mind waiting for 40 minutes, so I'm sorry, we can't do anything about this. We'll just file it and we'll call it civil. So most people don't even bother going into report. So we've fluffed around with our statistics, make it difficult to report. Don't react, people will give up, therefore crime rates go down. You go to the police, like I work as a private investigator now, you've got an offender, you've got all the details, you take it in. They won't give it a file number until such a time as it's processed and gone to court, because we only deal with positives. And this way we can get rid of the negative statistics, uncleared offences. And this is how we function with our corruption statistics as well. There is no such thing as corruption in New Zealand because we haven't defined it. In 2006, I was working as a private investigator, and a lady from Waitakere City Council, Lynn McDonald, who's the third lady out of Green Bay, came to me and she says, Grace, I have to volunteer my council-paid time to this organisation called the Animal Welfare Institute of New Zealand. Who are they? So I said, well, they're actually an equivalent of the RNZSPCA, but the RNZSPCA is an incorporated society, but this organisation doesn't have any legal existence. It's not a trust in any manner or form that we can see. It's not registered anywhere. And I found that the man who headed it was the previous head of the RNZSPCA before Bob Kerridge, a guy called Neil Wells. He had written his own business plan. He had gone to MPs and offered to write the legislation to facilitate his business plans. He was then independent advisor to the Select Committee, and then as the bill passed into law, he applied for it as the Animal Welfare Institute of New Zealand, stating that it had existed when in fact it didn't. So in 2006 we categorically proved that it didn't exist by registering an identically named organisation. The result is that it's cost me my marriage $300,000 and no one has acknowledged what's happened. It's been covered up at 90,000 feet. He got Wyn Hoadley, Graham Coots and himself to pose as the trust. There are no documents that link anything, it's a total makeover. Because I believe that what happened with AWINS is what's happening in New Zealand, and we've got massive identity fraud happening in the corporate identities. Another example of a very recent one that I worked on. Does this board flip? Yes. The Crayford Farms. Very interesting. Go. So, we have a company called Milk New Zealand Holding Limited, which is a Hong Kong company. It makes an application to the government to buy the Crayford farm. So, they checked this one out, and up here its company structure is Shanghai Pengjing that owns that. But they tell this company that before you can buy the farms, you've got to set up a company, you've got to register in New Zealand. And usually what happens is that this company registers in New Zealand as an overseas company, and then they set up other companies. But what happened in this case is that a company called Milk New Zealand Holding folder was Milk New Zealand Investments, and it had registered office address of Albert Street. I couldn't find Milk New Zealand Investment on the company's register, so I raised a question about it. And they said, oh, sorry, they made a mistake. This company is registered to a company in the British Virgin Islands. So the real owner of the Crayford Farms is this company, which may or may not be connected to the company that they checked out on. I've raised that issue, totally ignored. Now, I've been working with, because I was being sued, and they kept on telling me I had to take a lawyer on. I took a lawyer on. I met him in court. He was a human rights lawyer. Fantastic, I can help you. First of all, he ripped me off on my matrimonial property settlement. He wrote things into my deed after I'd signed it. He then took my matter to appeal and to judicial review, gave it to a junior solicitor, totally botched it. I paid him nearly $100,000. I never got timesheets. And then I got timesheets in the end, and they were duplicates. You know, same item twice on one invoice as on another, except one was 5,000 and 5,000, the other was 4,000 and 7,000. So I complained to the Law Society. He has sued me 4 times since then. The Law Society took 3 years to investigate him. He was actually struck off. His name is Eugene Orlov. He was struck off being insubordinate to a judgment. They've decided it's a little bit harsh, but he's now having, this week I was in court on bankruptcy claims for $3,000 when he owes me $30,000. Now, you shouldn't be under that kind of attack from lawyers, and it shouldn't take 3 years of the Law Society to investigate their own. I believe that the problem we've got in New Zealand goes right back to lawyers. Lawyers are the only group of people who have their own administration body which looks after them and admonishes them. The police have got the Independent Conducts Commission and they've got the Police Association, 2 separate bodies. Real estate agents have got 2 separate bodies. Lawyers only have one. And I don't believe that people can be the enforcement agency and the nurturer at the same time. You can't do it successfully. And that has to be divided. I'm actually starting a petition to have a separate regulatory body introduced for the lawyers. It's my second petition. My other one was presented to government, to Parliament just beginning of June. I think it was June, yeah. It was for the Independent Commission Against Corruption, because my matter, which I believe is seriously corruption, if any one of us can write legislation for our own business plan, advise on it, and then set it up without anyone checking whether an organisation exists. How it worked in Waitakere was like this. Animal welfare is what the XPCA do. Dog and stock control is sort of HIDATA, is what councils do. So, things, the cars. So if you were looking for A-wins, you would say, there it is. It was so confusing that the Ministry of Agriculture at the time said it was really hard to differentiate which was which. So a dog control officer paid by council would hop in their car, which was emblazoned to look like A-wins, and pick up someone's moggy. And they'd say, we're going to charge you. And incidentally, under the Animal Welfare Act, they are strict liability offences. Now, strict liability offences, it's a bit like driving at 60, 65. You've done it, you're there, you're guilty. Other offences which the police, usually enforce are the ones that involve some intention, that they meant to do things, accidental or, oversight doesn't come into it. So It's very lucrative under the Animal Welfare Act, especially the guy had written it with maximum enforcement and minimum responsibility back, and of course A1s couldn't be sued because it doesn't legally exist. So the dog control officer would pick up your moggy and report it to their manager at Animal Welfare or Dog Stock Control. He would pass it on to the head of A1s, which was himself. He would pass it on to his barrister, which was him. That would pass it on to, the person to pay for the damages by diversion or something, which he put in the bank account that only he administered. And it was just a perfect public office for a private pecuniary gain. I have been to the police, I've been to the SCFO, I have been everywhere. And I'm the one under attack. It was really heartening to hear that Winston Peters, sorry if I can mention that name in here, said yesterday that whistleblowers are annihilated in New Zealand. And I'm afraid they are. And this is where it happens. It happens through identity. No one checked in math whether the Animal Welfare Institute of New Zealand actually existed. And as a mother, I take offence to this because it took me 9 months to grow each of my babies. And then it took me 18 years to nurture them before they were considered a legal person. Now, someone sitting in Latvia using a Panamanian trust can have a New Zealand entity, a New Zealand company. Whether or not the trust exists in Panama or whether or not the director exists in Latvia, they've got a New Zealand legal entity. And these legal entities, once they're established here, are buying up property. New Zealand is totally about two things. It's about the NZX, because we've driven all our business, and that's why it's so important to be the least corrupt, because that's why people want to invest here. It's about the NZX, and it's totally about tax avoidance and making a facility offshore tax avoidance. We know better. Bahamas has ceased being a tax haven because they found that they could get cruise ships come in and they could offer far more employment to their people and far more constructive work by the tourist trade rather than banking. But just on the NZX aspect, going back in history, we had the Bulger government and his advisor was the Bankers Trust. And of course John Key became the head of the Bankers Trust. The Bankers Trust was they got their banks deregulated, and Deutsche Bank got involved, and of course they're involved in the Business Roundtable. The Business Roundtable promoted the whole concept of the super city and pushed for the super city. Now, I made a complaint to the police beginning of the year about Len Brown, because he received $750,000 over 2 election campaigns from an organisation called the New Auckland Council Trust. Now, it's another one of these kind of organisations. Now you see it, now you don't. And I believe that every organisation in New Zealand that trades or uses a trading name must define what it is, who it comprises of, or be a legal person. There's too much of this emperor's new clothes business where we're dealing with something that can attack you, but they're totally safe because you can't identify them. And this is something that lawyers do very, very well. I find it quite amusing to look at magic and tricks. I brought this along today. Does anyone know how to use these? I haven't touched them. Do you know anyone how to get the ring off? See, everything seems impossible until you know how. It's really simply done. The ring is off. And what amuses me about Transparency International New Zealand is that we say our integrity reports are robust because they look at this with the ring on and say, it's got to be robust, there's no way we can get that ring off. And Susan Snively actually said to the conference that Penny and I were at that they worked on the assumption that since New Zealand was the least corrupt, that our anti-corruption systems must be working, therefore corruption is not an issue, therefore it isn't a factor, and therefore we don't have to consider it. I, on the other hand, say that the minute you make an assumption, That's where the corruption and the fraud is. I have a 3-step program. These are my little Epsom election flyers. Question everything, assume nothing, learn the truth. And very simple, very straightforward, and there we go. And very effective. So, here we go. And one for the gentleman next to you. Let's see what else. Trusts are the greatest vehicle for fraud, and they're overused. And the thing that I find that we use most of is invisibility. And invisibility in New Zealand is used by way of trust, people you can't identify, confidentiality clauses, and it's just. That's the mystery, that's the mystique, that's how things got done in the past and people didn't know how it happened. I think we've become a lot wiser now thanks to the internet and all the rest. There's another, I do some professional speaking, and this is one of my other little ones I come across.
You don't listen, won't you?
Yes, my family were ex-murderers. No, my children's great-great-grandfather was John German Simons. He was a fencible captain. He was actually the brother of William Cornwallis Simons. William Cornwallis Simons was going to set up the Cornwallis Peninsula, and he drowned. So his younger brother came out from England, and as he left, his mother gave him this axe. Of course, it's been well used, and we've replaced the handle about 6 times and the head about 10 times. But this is still the same original axe. And this is still the same original Labour Party, National Party, company, anything. And when something has more than 2 parts which are replaced, don't be fooled by the company, don't be fooled by the name, because the heads have changed and their bodies have changed, and their philosophy has changed. And just because people have done certain things a certain way and they've had a good reputation, doesn't mean that they are still here today, because we're buying companies for their reputation, and people are using the reputation of the good company so that they can perpetrate fraud in New Zealand. And as I say, the police don't investigate fraud because they haven't got time, and everything's called civil, and the civil court is not somewhere where you want to go. The rules, the manipulation, the dirty tricks are unbelievable. I mean, you wouldn't play cards with someone who played dirty like lawyers do in court and get away with it. In the end, in a lot of courts, it depends not so much on the evidence, but on who knows the judge best. And that's not the justice system. Mind you, it's even due to common sense, we don't have a justice system. We've got a legal system, but our legal system is not based on law. So I think that's probably my time, isn't it? Any questions?
Yeah. Please stand up. Yeah.
So how can you find, is there any way, if you're looking at a company, is there any way you can find out who the principals behind a name are? Is there no way?
There is. I get a feeling about companies, and what I do is look at the person who's mentioned as a director, because a director could be a solicitor, it could be a nominee, so you check out the director, and you check out the website, you check out to see who the people are involved in the business. I've just got the silly notion.
You Google it. Is that a reliable way to go?
No, not Google. Google does a specific, wide-ranging search, but you go to the company's office, business.govt.nz, and you can put a company in and you can see who the directors are.
And so if it comes back they don't exist, what do you do about that?
Well, the thing is, there's a trick to that, because it could be a limited partnership, it could be and they're on different registries, so you've got to go on different registries. But we have very much a tendency to use trading names. See, what we do is we sort of say, here's an entity called Penny Grace. And you go up to Penny and you say, are you Penny Grace? And she says, no, I'm Penny. And you come up to me and you say, you're Penny Grace. And I say, no, I'm Grace. So where's Penny Grace? Oh, that's us plus 5 others. And you see how you cannot define what that name is, and it's a deception that we allow in law in New Zealand. We also allow everybody to use whatever name they feel like using, and even people standing for election are not standing under their legal names. They can have whatever name they prefer to use. I could use Minnie Mouse. Oh, I had that. I'm sorry. I'm not using that. Yeah, we are, New Zealand's come from an isolated background where people knew each other and we were reasonably honest with each other, and we've very, very quickly transmogrified into a complaint-based society where it's open slather and it's the, buyer beware, and we don't have any protection in place for fraud.
Why are more of these things not being exposed, really?
Because you get taken out.
But then, if you seem to lead it to the newspaper or something,
I'm sorry, I wish I could do that.
that.
There was a news item, very good website called Naked Capitalism, which showed that there was a New Zealand company called Unihold Limited that had been involved in $150 million worth of money laundering in the Ukraine. And me being me, sat down and worked out who the company belonged to, because ultimately every company comes back to an actual person. You've got an actual person as a shareholder, you've got a company, that company can be a shareholder of the next company, and it sort of moves up. And it came back to this woman called Lilia Sobolevia, who I know is Eugene Orlov's wife, and that's all I mentioned, was that this, through the company's office, was Eugene Orlov's wife. And on the basis of that, he's now taken me to court for $500,000 while he's trying to bankrupt me on $3,000. It doesn't make sense. I'm saying it's vexatious, but in our court system is so 12th century. It is absolutely archaic. And basically, you've got to go through all these silly processes of producing case law and all the rest. And it doesn't come down to nice, because I was a police prosecutor, and in the criminal court, it comes down to facts and evidence. But in the civil court, it comes down to this airy-fairy. So what happens is that our criminals who've got more money than honest people, they think that you're going to be a threat. They'll take you to court and sue your other self before you've even realised what's happening. And until we change that, nothing's going to happen. We're going to give them protection.
See, the fact of the matter is that that protection for whistleblowers in New Zealand, the Protected Disclosures Act, only applies to employees. So when you're like a ratepayer whistleblower, or just a ordinary person that doesn't fit into that category, there are no protections. And so
I've been to the Ombudsman, I've been to the Attorney General. The Ombudsman took 2.5 years and came back with an audit report from NAF. And through that report, I could prove that the whole organisation was fictitious. I took it back to the court, and I've just got a thing back from the judge saying I'm very litigious because this is now my 15th court process. The fact that the other 14 were all defence is totally beside the point. As a police officer, when I was a serving police officer, I would have said, you hear a story like that, there's probably a lot more to it than that can't happen in New Zealand. Well, I'm sorry, it's true. And I run a couple of websites. My anti-corruption website, I'm blogging every day now, putting up corruption issues. And my other website is Transparency New Zealand, because Transparency International wouldn't let me join. So I've set up Transparency New Zealand to highlight the corruption that we do have in New Zealand and ask the hard questions. But a few years ago, they tried to close down a mutual friend of ours, SEMA, for blogging, but that they realised that the internet has got so big that people can post from anywhere, and the control is no longer just with the media, and people are getting it out there through the internet, and we're able to see behind the way that the law works and the way decisions are made, which is something we couldn't do 20, 30 years ago.
just on that Public Records Act, like I say, it is very good legislation, it's just not being implemented. And as you're here with the Office of the Ombudsman, they get heaps of complaints, they're miles behind in dealing with stuff. But if the Public Records Act was implemented in a proper way, and that information was already publicly available, like in so many cases it should be, then the Ombudsman wouldn't have so much work to do. So my simple solution to that would be to stop the administration of the Public Records Act being held by the National Office of the Archives, who are another bloody useless lot, and divide it into two bits. The creation and maintenance of records, I'd make that the job of the Ombudsman, and if then they'd have a vested interest in getting on with it, because they should have less complaints, because the more information that's made publicly available, the less they'd have people saying, get me that information, or I want to get that information. And the storage and disposal of records, keep that with the National Office of the Archives. I mean, to me, that's just a simple common sense solution that would make a huge difference. So, yeah, but in terms of of solutions, you'll see, as far as our courts are concerned, that wouldn't you think, if New Zealand's perceived to be the least corrupt country in the world, we'd already have these things. Our judges do not have an enforceable code of conduct, and neither do our MPs. And I believe that's one of the main reasons why we keep getting this bad behaviour from our members of Parliament, because they don't have an enforceable code of conduct. Yet they pass the laws that make sure other people have enforceable codes of conduct they don't have on themselves. Outrageous.
A recent good example of how the Commission Against Corruption will help is that John Key said, oh, people report MPs to me all the time, and I just put them in my top drawer. So of course what he does is he keeps it in his top drawer, and if someone comes along and says, one of your MPs, he'll bring this out and he'll say, oh, I've got this. But my argument is that every time there's a complaint against an MP, it should be independently and properly investigated. That person should be held accountable to the law just the same way as any one of us are. And I believe that MPs and lawyers and people who hold public office have a greater responsibility for the law than ordinary plebs like us. So I kind of believe that it shouldn't be the Prime Minister who can play a political game with information that comes his way, and it needs to be done independently. And we haven't got those processes. We became like the rest of the world very quickly, and we learned the bad tricks and implemented the bad tricks, and we need to have the safeguards in place.
But that thing about proper written records, like for example, as I say, do we not know who these people are? But in terms of at local government, there is no register of financial interests of local councillors. It's not a mandatory legal requirement, like it is with MPs, but it's not with local councillors. So then you've got this terrible sort of big black hole where you don't know. The public doesn't know where our money's going. We don't know if things are being done in a proper way. You go to make complaints, and the parties to whom you make complaints are all useless or corrupt. And but we're the least corrupt country in the world. Unbelievable. Yeah. But it's not all bad. What we're doing is through, although we've got a huge meeting here today, it doesn't matter. At least you people will be able to go out with a greater knowledge of what is actually happening. Word of mouth is really important, and by actually finding out today that Judith Collins finally has been forced to resign, that's public pressure, you know. So it's that public pressure thing that does really make a difference. But just one thing I did forget to mention just really quickly was this Auckland growth. I know it's a big issue in Hellensville, it's a big issue for the whole of the Auckland area. So I keep saying you take the skinniest part of New Zealand and you can stack people on top of each other. Well, how dumb is that? And what I flushed out was from the Department of Statistics was a letter where they stated their recommendation was medium population growth projection, not high population growth projection, because this myth, there's an extra 1 million people coming to Auckland, you know, it's just, you know, like the technique of the big lie, just keep repeating something. So I thought, hang on, where did that come from? Dig. And then I find out that that wasn't actually the case, because under the Local Government Auckland Council Act 2009, when you get into the spatial planning, it's got to be evidentially based. So if you're going to talk about future population growth, who are the experts in that area? Department of Statistics. And I've got letters from the Minister for Statistics making exactly that point. So what I ended up finding out, well, where did this extra 300,000 people come from? median population growth projections about 700,000, high population growth about 1 million, an extra 300,000 people come into Auckland, and I find out, I troll through the minutes of Auckland Council, and I find out that there's one person, the Chief Planning Officer, Dr. Roger Blakely, he was the one who recommended high population growth. One person. One person. And so what I did, I petitioned and got an inquiry by the Social Services Select Committee, because my petition requested that Parliament declines to proceed with the Housing Accords and Special Housing Area Bill until the lawfulness of the reliance of Auckland Council on the New Zealand Department of Statistics high population growth projections instead of their medium population growth projections for the Auckland Spatial Plan has been properly and independently investigated, taking into consideration that both Auckland Transport and Watercare Services Limited have relied upon medium population growth projections for their infrastructural asset management plans. I mean, if you're going to have all these people coming, you've got to have the infrastructure. You just can't, hope that the next day, like magic mushrooms, they're all upcoming the schools and the roads and the water supplies. It doesn't work like that. You need to plan. And my argument was, well, why does all this growth have to come to Auckland in the first place?
I can tell you why, because we're actually, all the people associated with the Committee for Auckland are recruiting in India and China, that they've got their own people, they've got their own real estate agents. It's all about them making money. And it's all about large things like Stevenson's. You've seen how much concrete's going in around. If you'd invested in Stevenson's a few years ago, you'd be sitting very nicely, but okay, we're going to pull the plug on that shortly because we're running out of money, we've overspent. But we don't do our houses up to some obscene standard. We live within our means, and we should be doing that with our cities, with our country. But Auckland is all about big and bring people in, lots of big enterprise, and that way it's a share market. The Committee for Auckland, and we've studied it, are all tied up in the NZX, and it's all tied up to bring more people and make more money.
And property developers.
And it's not about us, it's not about our lifestyle, it's not about preserving the New Zealand we had, it's about selling it off to the world.
But the other thing is that how fraudulent is it if the Auckland Council is now borrowing 5.5 billion in debt, and we've got 5.8 billion exposure to derivatives. But if you borrow on the basis of a future rating base, which one person basically made up, how's that not fraudulent? You can say, well, in 30 years' time we're going to have another million people, but actually you can't base that. You can't base that on fact. Because what happened was when I petitioned Parliament, I studied it, I gave them 25 pages of evidence, and what happened was the Social Services Select Committee, they talked to the Mayor, Len Brown, and they talked to Dr. Roger Blakely, and the Social Services Select Committee, they said, we think it's reasonable to base it on a high population growth projection. I said, I don't care whether you think it's reasonable. I asked if it was lawful. Can you please reconsider? We have another view. I'm thinking, and then we had a telephone conversation. I said, you are the people who make the law. What is the point of you making the law if you don't stick to it yourselves? Honestly, again, categorising, you couldn't make this up. But have had a bit of experience with the parliamentary process. Worked very closely with Graham McCready in Grace as well, and we managed to get John Banks held accountable, which was historic and unprecedented. And what I have here is the summons to witness that went to Greg Towers, who was Kim.com's lawyer, to Wayne Tempero, who was Kim.com's Chief of Security, to Nigel Morrison, and to Kim.com himself. I was the process server that actually handled the witness summonses that got them into court, and the rest is history. But so it does prove that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. The secret is stand your ground, tell the truth, and keep going. So,
I was just going to mention that the funny part, suspicious part about John Banks when he was found guilty being a former police prosecuting sergeant, I knew that there was a definition of being convicted, and it's under the Crimes Act. Section 3 of the Crimes Act says convicted means to be found guilty on indictment. An indictment is any charge that carries an imprisonable term, which of course his did. So I questioned, Penny and I went into court together, that the judge had found him guilty. And by definition, he had been convicted. Now, everywhere in the world, the word guilty and convicted means the same thing. In New Zealand, we've now broken it up since June last year. And I've done an Official Information Act request, asked for the background documents that brought about the dropping of Section 3 of that definition. And there is nothing. It's simply just disappeared out of our statutes. And when things can just get taken out of our statutes without discussion, consideration, and the reason that was done was so that John Banks could stay in until sentencing. And Penny and I never heard anything back about our memorandum that we dropped in the High Court, except for the fact that John Banks resigned 2 days later. You know, and this is how things are done, sleight of hand. And the thing that I've learned about magic, the reason the wand exists is to have a distraction. And we do such wonderful distractions.
So will it be put back at
No. And I've had long discussions with some guy down in Wellington, and he says, oh, there's nothing that's in conflict. And I said, well, hang on, there's one section that says that the evidence must not be such that a jury can't convict. If a jury can't convict, how come a judge can't convict? You know, how come a judge has got a two-step process? And it's very clear that the word convict comes from the word convince. So when someone's convinced about something, they're guilty, and it's convict. We just rewrite it.
What I'd like to suggest we do is maybe just, have a little bit of a break, and then what I'm really keen to do is to find out, those of you who like to stay on, what your main issues are, what do you want in terms of what needs fixing, and look at some solutions. Yeah.